Dear friends, today an interesting story awaits you. I invite you to listen on my Purple Heart Stories channel, and please support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. The Coastal Snake. Chapter 1, Tidal Wave. There are days that change everything. November 13th became just such a day, a quiet earthquake that turned my life upside down with the mercilessness of an ocean tide. I, Jack Harrison, had turned 36, and the past decided to return to my life like a ghost ship emerging from the fog. The morning was damp and chilly. The salty breeze from the Old Harbor Tavern mixed with the aromas of freshly baked bread that Olivia prepared at dawn. For 13 years I had been building this life, brick by brick, day by day, after returning from Iraq with a metal plate in my shoulder and nightmares that haunted me in moments of silence. The family tavern, inherited from my father, marriage to Olivia, who had graduated from culinary school in New York, and most importantly, the trust of my 13-year-old daughter Rachel, who saw me not only as a father but also as a mentor in her passion for climbing the coastal cliffs. I stood by a curiously curved map of the coastal cliffs, pinned to an oak table next to the panoramic window overlooking the bay. The antique ship's clock, swaying on the wall behind the counter, had just struck 6 in the evening. Its measured toll echoed in my chest, a sensation I never got used to. "Look, Dad," Rachel pointed with a thin finger at the winding route line resembling the back of a sea dragon. "If we go along this traverse, we'll save energy for the final section." Her dark red hair, gathered in a casual bun, gleamed copper in the last rays of the setting sun. Freckles, like constellations, were scattered across her face, a map that I studied with the tenderness of an astronomer who discovered a new star. She bit the end of her pencil, a habit I fought unsuccessfully against but secretly found charming. "Not a bad idea, little one," I nodded, "but don't forget about the southeast wind. At that height, it can turn a simple traverse into a journey on a razor's edge." I remembered when I first took her to a small coastal cliff when she was only 5. She was so tiny that the safety system hung on her like a pirate costume on a deck cat. Now the muscles of her forearms resembled twisted ship's ropes, the result of endless hours of training. From the kitchen came the aromas of new dishes that Olivia was preparing for the updated menu. The whisper of the sea outside the window mixed with the quiet conversations of visitors, creating that special, calming noise that I so loved in my tavern. I watched as Olivia moved between the tables, elegant even in her work apron, with a loose blonde strand of hair stuck to her temple. Her movements were smooth and confident, like those of an experienced sailor who knows every inch of their vessel. In the far corner of the hall sat my brothers in arms, a handful of veterans who had survived the sandstorms of Iraq. We didn't talk about the war, not directly. The war was present in their eyes, in Ray's artificial leg, in my sudden panic attacks that occurred in the first years after returning. But we had a silent agreement. The tavern was a shelter, not a battlefield. The doorbell jingled, swayed by the evening breeze. At that moment, no one yet knew that the familiar world was about to shatter into fragments, sharp as the wreckage of a yacht broken against the reefs. I saw them immediately, people of a certain sort leave a trail in the air, like a shark fin on the surface of calm water. A tall man in a gray suit the color of a storm cloud beside him, a woman with fiery red hair. Behind their backs loomed 2 sturdy men with frozen faces and vigilant eyes. Every muscle in their bodies was taut as a string. Security. In my past life, I had selected such people myself. But all my attention was riveted on the man in the suit. 16 years, that's a whole lifetime, but I would recognize that cold smile even through 1,000. Olivia stopped so abruptly, as if she had run into an invisible wall. The tray with plates slipped from her hands, scattering in a ringing crumble across the wooden floor. No one noticed this. All eyes were fixed on those who had entered. "Uncle Victor," whispered Rachel, instinctively moving closer to me. She knew this name only from rare, fragmentary phrases and old photographs hidden in a distant drawer of the dresser. Victor Harrison walked through the hall slowly, with that special confidence of a man accustomed to the world stepping aside for him. His Italian shoes silently glided across the wooden floor, polished by years to the shine of honey amber. Behind him, swaying her hips to the rhythm of invisible music, walked the red-haired woman in an emerald dress that clung to her body like a second skin. Natalia, that's how she would introduce herself later. In our small town of Raven Creek, her appearance was like the arrival of a tropical bird among seagulls. Jackie, my favorite nephew, Victor's voice, hoarse from expensive cigars, filled the space of the tavern like a tide fills a lagoon. In the corner of my veterans, silence immediately reigned. They, like me, felt the falseness in this joy. 16 years, 16 long years, I kept wondering, what have you become? And I must admit, the army did you good. He spread his arms for a hug, but I remained motionless, like a rock against the onslaught of waves. Victor, not at all embarrassed, lowered his arms and turned to Olivia, who was silently collecting the fragments of broken plates. And here's the beautiful Olivia. I heard you studied at the New York Culinary Academy. Impressive, very impressive. Something in his tone made every cell of my body tense. I stepped forward, instinctively placing myself between my wife and uncle. Tony, Victor snapped his fingers, and one of his companions darted to the bar. The most expensive wine in your cellar and glasses. Crystal, I hope. We need to celebrate my return. In Vegas, I've grown accustomed to a certain level. He sat down at the central table, casually pushing aside the map of coastal routes. Natalia gracefully settled beside him, crossing one leg over the other. Her green eyes, cold and calculating, slid appraisingly over every corner of my tavern. Vegas has been very generous to me, continued Victor, adjusting his already impeccable tie knot. You know how it is, the right word to the right people, a fortunate investment here, a small favor there, and suddenly you're on the threshold of the Forbes list. He laughed, but that laughter resembled the screech of a knife against glass. And here I see everything's the same as before, the same decor, the same faces. It's like an open-air museum. A few blocks from the Old Harbor Tavern, in the Mountain Pass coffee shop owned by Martin Wells, a completely different atmosphere reigned. The roar of motorcycles tore through the evening silence like thunder from a clear sky. In an instant, the door swung open, and 5 bikers entered the coffee shop. Their worn leather vests were adorned with a patch depicting a sea serpent wrapped around a trident. In front walked a tall man with silver gray in his hair and a scar cutting across the left side of his face, like a coastline on a map. An old army tag glinted on his chest, a mockery of a symbol that once meant something. The few visitors, sensing the approach of a storm, quietly headed for the exit. Martin Wells, who was wiping coffee cups behind the counter, placed his hand on a baseball bat hidden under the counter. "How can I be of service, gentlemen?" His voice was calm, but the fingers gripping the cloth had whitened from tension. The man with the scar, Oscar, as he was known in certain circles, smiled. A chill ran down Martin's spine from that smile, like from the first winter wind. "They say you brew the best coffee in the district, Martin. Pour us some, and let's talk about the future, about your future." The bikers spread throughout the coffee shop with that special coordination that revealed their military past. One of them locked the front door and flipped the open sign to closed. A sense of inevitable trouble hung in the air, heavy as pre-storm clouds. Closer to midnight, when the last visitors had left the Old Harbor, I remained alone in the dimly lit hall, mechanically wiping the counter and trying to order my thoughts that were scattering like sea foam under the blows of waves. The sound of footsteps made me turn around. Victor stood in the doorway without his entourage, but no less dangerous for it. In the dim light, his eyes seemed even colder, like deep-sea trenches where the sun never reaches. "Cozy little place," Victor ran his finger along the wooden panel as if looking for dust. "Your father always knew how to create an atmosphere, Pity he didn't know how to make money. I straightened, feeling the muscles in my back tense. What do you want, Victor? Why did you come back? Oh, Jackie, still so straightforward. Victor settled into an armchair, crossing one leg over the other with the air of someone sitting in the presidential office. You know, the town has changed a lot over the years. New opportunities have emerged, new horizons. I thought, why not return to my roots? Help the good old family, so to speak. Help, I laughed bitterly, remembering how many years ago he had already helped by disappearing with the money for my mother's treatment. Like you helped back then, running off with the money for chemotherapy. A shadow crossed Victor's face, but he quickly regained his composure like an experienced poker player. Ancient history, nephew. I prefer to look to the future. And speaking of the future, he took an envelope from his inner pocket, so thick that I could almost feel the weight of the paper from a distance. Here's an amount 10 times the real value of this. Charming tavern. Sell me the establishment, Jackie. The easy way. I didn't even look at the envelope. Victor's money always smelled of trouble, a smell that no soap could wash away. This tavern is not for sale, to anyone ever. Everything is for sale, nephew. It's just a question of price. And methods of persuasion. Victor rose, straightening his jacket, the perfect cut of which could not hide the predatory essence of the man inside. Think about my offer. I sincerely want to help, after all. Family, you know. When the door closed behind Victor, I stood for a long time in the darkness, looking at the old photographs on the walls. From one of them, my father smiled, firmly holding the keys to the newly purchased tavern. Young Victor stood beside him, and even then in his eyes could be read a hunger for more, like a predatory fish always looking for bigger prey. The next morning, Olivia, sorting through mail in her office, noticed an envelope with no return address. Inside was an old photograph, the sight of which took her breath away. In the picture, she, quite young, was kissing a young Victor Harrison against the backdrop of a New York cafe. The photograph was accompanied by a note with an address and meeting time, written in a familiar sweeping handwriting. Olivia's hands trembled as she lit a match. The flame quickly devoured the photograph, turning the past to ashes, but the written address had already imprinted in her memory. For the past 16 years, she had carefully buried memories of that time, of her naivety, of how she had taken pretense for sincerity. Now the past had returned, threatening to destroy everything dear to her. That evening, I looked into the pantry for a box of imported ale. The sound of muffled voices made me freeze. In the semi-darkness, I discerned two silhouettes. Olivia and Victor stood too close to each other. My uncle's hand lay on my wife's waist, and a moment later their lips met in a kiss that didn't look forced or violent. I silently backed toward the exit, feeling the blood in my veins turning to ice. 16 years of military training helped me restrain myself, not reveal my presence. But when I was already at the threshold, I noticed Victor's gaze. He had seen everything. And the smirk on his face spoke clearer than any words. This was just the beginning of the game. Chapter 2: Whirlpool. The morning was damp. Fog crept over the streets of Raven Creek like a ghostly blanket, turning the familiar outlines of houses into blurred silhouettes. I was driving along the deserted streets in my old Bronco when a call came through the police radio, which I habitually kept on from my service days. All patrols. Code 187 at the Mountain Pass coffee shop. Possible suicide. A chill ran through me to the bone, and it wasn't from the morning dampness. I sharply turned the car around, feeling a familiar sense of trouble spreading inside. Martin wasn't just the owner of the coffee shop across the road. He was the only one who extended a hand to me when I returned from Iraq with a metal plate in my shoulder and nightmares that woke me in a cold sweat. It was Martin who helped me cope with panic attacks, taught me to trust people again after combat had etched this ability out of me. When I pulled up to the coffee shop, a small crowd had already gathered. Police tapes fluttered in the wind like yellow flags at an imaginary finish line. Sheriff Alex Morrison, an old friend of my father, stood on the porch, grimly looking at the body that paramedics were preparing to load into an ambulance. "Stay back, son," Alex tried to stop me, but I had already slipped under the police tape, feeling how past and present mixed into a murky whirlpool. Martin lay behind the counter of the coffee shop, where he had stood for the last 25 years of his life. The hunting rifle with which he had allegedly shot himself lay nearby. But my trained eye immediately noticed inconsistencies. Martin was left-handed, but the shot was to the right temple. Signs of a struggle were skillfully masked, but years of service had taught me to see what others missed. "This isn't suicide, Alex," I said quietly to the sheriff. "Martin would never do that. His daughter was supposed to arrive from college next week." "I know," replied Morrison just as quietly, "but there's no evidence. Fingerprints wiped professionally, no witnesses, a painfully familiar handwriting." Before Martin's body was taken away, two men in expensive suits, the kind never tailored in small towns, appeared at the coffee shop. They briskly produced documents confirming the purchase of the establishment due to the owner's bankruptcy. I recognized Oscar's handwriting and his gang. That's how they had dealt with other establishments in the neighboring town. The second scene played out in my tavern several hours later. Olivia was waiting for me in the empty hall, nervously fingering the folds of her apron as if trying to read the future from them. Her usually confident hands were trembling, and in her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, stood tears. "We need to talk," she said, and I felt everything inside tighten like a ship caught in a deadly storm. I silently nodded toward a chair, remaining standing myself. A military habit, always keeping a potential danger in sight, even if that danger is your own wife. "I need to tell you about Victor," Olivia began, avoiding my gaze. "It was 16 years ago when I was studying at culinary school. I was young, naive, and full of ambition. Victor appeared like an answer to my prayers, a successful businessman who saw talent in me when others saw only a provincial girl. He paid for my education, gave expensive gifts, showed me a world I had only read about in glossy magazines." She fell silent, gathering her strength as if before a plunge into icy water. I stood motionless, like a rock against which waves of confessions break, only the muscles in my jaw working. "There was a romance between us, brief but intense like a tropical storm. Then he disappeared, simply stopped answering calls as if he'd been washed out to sea. And a year later I met you and understood what real love was, real relationships." "Why now?" My voice was hoarse as after a long silence. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because he's back, and I'm afraid, Jack, not of him but of what he knows about me, what he has on me." I exhaled slowly. Military training had taught me to control emotions, but now it was difficult, like trying to hold back the ocean tide with bare hands. "I want you to move to the coastal motel," I finally said. "I need time to think." "Jack," she reached out to me, but I backed away as if her touch could burn. "Not now, Olivia, just not now." When she left, I remained alone in the empty hall. The photographs on the walls, the history of the Harrison family, seemed to mock me. Somewhere among them was a picture of my wedding to Olivia, taken against the backdrop of coastal cliffs on a day that seemed the beginning of something eternal. Now I looked at this photograph and saw Victor's shadow, invisibly present between us all these years, like a third figure in a family portrait, blurred but undoubted. Rachel loved to train at dawn. At this hour, the coastal cliffs belonged only to her, no tourists, no other climbers, just her and the stone, them and the sea below. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, coloring the water the shade of molten copper, when she was already climbing along a familiar route, her fingers confidently finding familiar holds. The new camera, a gift for her 13th birthday, swayed on a strap around her neck. She wanted to take some sunrise shots from the top point of the route. The sound of motorcycles reached her when she was about halfway up. Strange. Usually at such an hour the coast was deserted, as after an apocalypse. Rachel pressed herself against the rock, looking for the source of the noise. Through a gap between the cliffs, she saw three motorcycles stopped on the old coastal road. Those same bikers she had seen yesterday in town were meeting with some people in a black SUV, gleaming in the morning light like the wet back of a whale. Something about this meeting seemed wrong to her. Perhaps how nervously the bikers looked around, or how quickly the bulky packages were handed over. Rachel automatically raised the camera to her eyes. Years of training with me had taught her to document anything suspicious. The sound of the shutter in the morning silence was like a gunshot. One of the bikers sharply raised his head. His gaze slid across the cliff and stopped exactly at the spot where Rachel was hiding. She saw him nudge Oscar with his elbow, pointing upward. "There's someone up there." Rachel didn't wait for the continuation. With a jerk, she pulled herself up, swung her leg onto a small ledge and began climbing quickly, no longer concerned with safety. From below came shouts and the roar of engines. She knew these cliffs like the back of her hand, but had never had to climb at such a speed, as if death itself was breathing down her neck. The bikers split up. Two raced up the road circling the cliffs, two remained below. Rachel reached the top and, without wasting time, ran along a barely visible trail, one of those that she and I used during training. Behind her, branches cracked. The pursuers had also made it up. "Stop, you little brat. Just try to delete those photos." Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat as she took out her phone on the run. I always said, in a critical situation, first call, then think. Cold fingers slid across the screen like a fish in the hands of an inexperienced fisherman. come on," she whispered, jumping over a fallen tree. The dial tone seemed like an eternity stretched to the limit. "Rachel," my voice calm and collected, sounded like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Dad, they're chasing me. I'm on Eagle Trail, they." The phone slipped from her hands when she slipped on rocks wet with morning dew. Rachel managed to roll aside a moment before the biker's heavy boot landed where her hand had just been. "Caught you, little bird." I drove the car along the winding coastal road, pressing the gas pedal to the floor as if this could make time flow faster. Military training took over. My mind coldly analyzed the situation while my heart was torn with fear for my daughter. Eagle Trail. There are only 3 escape routes from there, if they corner her at the north ledge. I sharply turned the wheel, directing the car along a barely visible hunting path, as if diving into a green tunnel. Here I could cut the path, gain precious minutes. Branches lashed at the windshield. The car's undercarriage scraped against rocks now and then, but I didn't slow down, feeling how each second was slipping away like blood from an open wound. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the gorge. I went cold but immediately recognized the characteristic sound, a hunting rifle, not a pistol. A warning shot in the air. So they needed her alive. So I still had time. I burst into the clearing just in time to see Rachel, pressed to the edge of a cliff, throwing stones at the approaching bikers. Her face was white as chalk, but in her eyes burned the same fire I'd seen in the mirror in the darkest days of war, determination to survive at any cost. I didn't brake, directed the car straight at the pursuers, forcing them to jump aside. Screeching brakes, the smell of burning rubber, curses, everything merged into a single chaos. "In the car," I barked, throwing open the door. Rachel dived into the seat a split second before a bullet pierced the place where she had just been standing. The sound of the rear window shattering was like a slap. I turned the car around, raising a fountain of mud and small stones with the wheels. The bikers rushed to their motorcycles, but pursuing a heavy Bronco in such terrain was like hunting a shark in the open sea in a rowboat. An hour later, after I had taken Rachel to a safe place, to my old comrade Ray's hunting lodge high above the coast, Natalia appeared in the Old Harbor Tavern. She entered as if she owned the place, her high heels beating a precise rhythm on the wooden floor, like a metronome of fate. I was just wiping the bar counter, preparing for the evening influx of visitors, and trying to deal with the hurricane of emotions inside. "Whiskey? Neat," she said, settling onto a bar stool with that special grace that cannot be faked. In the daylight, without evening makeup, she looked younger, but something in her eyes made one stay alert, the look of someone who had seen too much and forgotten too little. "The bar opens in an hour," I replied, not stopping my work, as if she were just another piece of furniture. "I think you'll make an exception for a federal agent." She placed an ID on the counter. "Special Agent Diana Fox, although I like Natalia better. It's warmer, don't you think?" I carefully examined the document, nodding to myself that it looked absolutely genuine, which, of course, meant nothing. In my past life, I had seen enough forgeries indistinguishable from originals. And to what do I owe a visit from a federal agent? Has the government become interested in the recipe for my crab soup? Victor Harrison. We've been watching him for 2 years. Drug trafficking, money laundering, contract killings. The list is as impressive as a menu in a five-star restaurant, but evidence was always lacking. She paused, studying me as carefully as I had studied her ID. Until this morning. I finally poured her whiskey, a double portion, carefully and slowly, giving myself time to consider the situation. Continue. "Your daughter photographed a meeting of couriers with bikers. This is the first direct evidence of a connection between Oscar's gang and Victor's operations." She sipped the whiskey without wincing. "We can protect you, your family, but we need those photos." Something in her voice made me wary, like an old sea wolf sensing the approach of a storm. Intuition, honed by years of service, screamed of danger. "And why should I believe you?" "Because we have a common enemy, and because—" She leaned closer, her perfume more intoxicating than whiskey, creating an illusion of intimacy. "I've seen how he destroys people, how he turns their lives into shipwreck debris. I don't want that to happen to you." Our gazes met, and for a moment I thought I saw something genuine, authentic flash in her eyes. A spark of understanding passed between us like an electric discharge. "Think about my offer." She left a business card on the counter. "You don't have much time. The tide doesn't wait." When she left, I stood for a long time, looking at the business card and trying to sort out my own feelings. Natalia's appearance added a new level of complexity to an already convoluted situation, like an unexpected gust of wind changing a ship's course. Olivia entered her room at the Coastal Motel, feeling deadly fatigue, as if each step was difficult. The events of recent days seemed to have sucked all strength out of her, leaving only an empty shell. She turned on the light and froze. On the bed lay an envelope with a DVD disc. One didn't need the gift of foresight to guess who had left it. Victor's face appeared on the TV screen. "Hello, dear." His voice oozed with fake concern, like poison from a wound. "I hope you haven't forgotten our agreement. You have a talented daughter, so brave, climbing rocks like a real professional. It would be a shame if something happened to her." The camera showed footage of today's chase. Olivia pressed her hand to her mouth, holding back a scream. "You know what needs to be done," continued Victor. "Convince Jack to sell the tavern, or Rachel's next cliff excursion might end tragically." The video ended, and Olivia sat in the darkness, feeling tears rolling down her cheeks. She took out her phone, found my number, but couldn't bring herself to call. What could she say? How to explain that she was again trapped by a man who knew how to turn human weaknesses into weapons? The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, falling onto the carpet with a dull thud, like the last grain of sand in an hourglass. Chapter 3: Reverse Current. The night was moonless. I lay on the frozen ground near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, watching through night vision goggles as boxes were loaded into a truck with the logo of a local transport company. Beside me crouched Natalia, or Diana. I still hadn't decided which name was real. Her breath in the cold air turned into small clouds of vapor, like smoke from a ghostly sailor's pipe. Over the past week, this was our third joint operation tracking drug trafficking routes. Working with her reminded me of the old days in special forces, the same precision of actions, the same silent understanding developed through years of training. In such moments, I almost believed she really was a federal agent. Diana moved like a professional, without unnecessary movements, nothing showy. Looking at her now, in tactical gear with a pistol on her hip, it was hard to believe this was the same woman who had appeared in my tavern in heels and an evening dress, like a queen condescending to visit a fishing village. "Third truck this week," she whispered, not taking her eyes off what was happening below. "They're ramping up operations. See the numbers on the boxes. The same ones were in the documents we found in Martin's coffee shop after his death." I nodded. The puzzle was gradually coming together, like a mosaic of scattered fragments. Victor was using a network of restaurants and cafes as a cover for drug distribution. Each establishment bought by the bikers became a new point in this network. My tavern remained the last uncontrolled place in town, the last beacon in a sea of growing darkness. "Look," Diana touched my shoulder, sending an involuntary shiver through my body which I attributed to the cold. Below, a black SUV appeared, the same one Rachel had photographed in the mountains. A man in an expensive coat stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized my uncle's walk, the confident stride of a man in charge. "Looks like your relative decided to personally oversee the shipment." Diana took out a camera with a long focus lens. "This is exactly what we need, a direct link between Victor and—" She was interrupted by the sound of approaching motorcycles. Oscar's bikers, about 10 of them, surrounded the warehouse like a wolf pack surrounds prey. Professional security, not like common thugs. I noted how they took positions, blocking all escape routes. Military training, familiar as my own breathing. "We need to leave," I whispered. "They've started changing their patrol pattern. It's going to get hot here soon." We carefully crawled back, dissolving into the darkness like 2 drops of ink in the night sea. Diana occasionally stopped to take pictures. Each click of the shutter was like a heartbeat in my ears. When we finally reached the car, parked a mile from the warehouse, she smiled triumphantly. "With these photos and your daughter's testimony, we have enough evidence for an arrest warrant. End of game, Jack. We've got him." I started the engine, feeling anxiety growing inside, similar to what sailors feel when they notice a dark strip of an approaching storm on the horizon. Something was wrong. Everything was falling into place too smoothly, too simply. Through years of service, I had learned to trust this feeling. It often stood between life and death. At the tavern, a surprise awaited us that chilled me to the bone. The front door was ajar, though I clearly remembered locking it. Inside, a light was burning, diluting the darkness like a lighthouse beacon dilutes the night gloom. The first thing I saw upon entering the hall was overturned furniture and broken dishes scattered across the floor, like shattered dreams. On the bar counter lay Olivia's chef's jacket, stained with blood, whose bright color contrasted with the white fabric. "God," exhaled Diana. I rushed to the kitchen, feeling blood poolsing in my temples, drowning out all thoughts. Signs of struggle were everywhere. Overturned pots, spilled spices, a broken window like a scene from a horror movie, only too real, too close. On the refrigerator, an envelope with my name was attached with a magnet, written in a familiar sweeping handwriting. Inside was a note. "Dear nephew, I hope you didn't think you could play your little game unnoticed. Olivia sends her regards. She's alive. For now. If you want to see her again, bring the flash drive with your daughter's photos to the old lighthouse. You have 2 hours. Time is ticking." Attached to the note was a photograph. Olivia, bound, with a gag in her mouth, sitting on a chair in some dark room. In the background, old mechanisms were visible. I recognized the interior of the abandoned lighthouse standing at the very edge of the northern cliff, like a sentry who had long forgotten his duty. "You're not planning to go there alone, are you?" Diana put her hand on my shoulder, and her touch was strangely comforting. "I have a support group I can—" "No time," I cut her off. "He'll kill her if he suspects something's wrong. I know Victor. He's not one to bluff." Diana bit her lip as if struggling with herself, a strangely human gesture for a woman who seemed carved from stone. Then I'm going with you. No discussion. You saved my life during the warehouse raid, remember. Now it's my turn. I looked at my watch. Less than 2 hours remained until the meeting. Somewhere out there in the darkness, my wife was in the hands of a man for whom another's life meant less than a cigar or a glass of good wine. I nodded. All right, but we play by my rules, on my territory. The old lighthouse towered over the town like a castle from a tale forgotten by time. Once its light had guided ships, now the peeling paint, broken windows, and rusted metal structures gave it the appearance of a ghost stuck between worlds. I parked the car in the gravel area at the foot of the cliff. Beside it stood 3 motorcycles and the familiar black SUV, aggressively gleaming in the moonlight. "Do you have the flash drive?" asked Diana, checking her pistol. In the headlights, her face seemed carved from marble, beautiful and cold at the same time. I patted the pocket of my jacket, a small piece of plastic on which was recorded the fate not only of Victor, but also of everyone I loved. For this, my uncle was ready to cross any line. Well, I was ready for anything too, for my family, for Olivia, despite the fact that her betrayal burned me from within like a slow poison. We climbed the weathered steps to the lighthouse, each step accompanied by an ominous creak, as if the building was protesting our presence. Inside burned a dim light, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. Olivia sat on the same chair as in the photograph, only now without the gag. Her eyes, when they met mine, were full of such fear and guilt that I physically felt pain in my chest. Next to her stood Oscar, his hand resting on my wife's shoulder, a silent reminder of what could happen at any moment. Against the opposite wall were 4 more bikers, their faces as impassive as professional killers. And here's our hero. Victor emerged from the shadows, applauding as if I were an actor taking a bow after a successful performance. And Agent Fox, or should I say Natalia, excellent work, darling. You're impeccable as always. I didn't immediately understand the meaning of these words. But when the cold barrel of a pistol pressed against the back of my head, reality crashed down on me like the ninth wave upon a defenseless vessel. "Sorry, Jack," Diana's voice sounded almost sincere. "Nothing personal, just business." "How many years have we been working together?" Victor put his arm around Diana's waist when she approached him. 10, 12. And every time the same story, a trusting hero, ready to save everyone and everything. They're so predictable. Olivia jerked on the chair, trying to say something, but Oscar tightened his grip on her shoulder. On her cheek was a fresh bruise, a purple-blue spot on pale skin. "I've waited 16 years for this moment," continued Victor, packing around the room like a conductor before an orchestra. "You know what's the funniest part? When I ran off with the money for your mother's treatment, no one even suspected deception. Everyone thought I died in that accident. Touchingly tearful, the whole town mourned me, creating an alibi I hadn't even asked for. And I was enjoying life in Vegas, building my empire. But something was missing. Do you know what, Jackie?" "Power," I said through clenched teeth. "Money was never enough for you. You needed to prove that you could break anyone, turn them into your own reflection." "You're smarter than you look," Victor laughed. "Exactly. This pathetic little town, your father with his high moral principles, all this provincial virtue, it made me sick. But you were always special. In you I saw myself, a wolf trapped in a pen with sheep. Now it's time to turn this whole place into what it should be, a profitable business. A small but important part of my empire. And you think you can just walk away like that?" I slowly turned, looking for weaknesses in the opponent's positions, like a chess player calculating options in a hopeless game. "After everything you've done." "Oh, little nephew, I've already left. You just haven't realized it yet." Victor pulled out a pistol, small, with a nickel-plated handle like that of a collector, not a killer. "Flash drive on the floor, slowly." I lowered my hand into my pocket. At that moment the roar of engines came from outside, but not motorcycles. Something more powerful, more familiar. Victor frowned. What is that? The answer to Victor's question was a deafening crash. The glass windows of the lighthouse exploded into fragments as an old pickup truck crashed into them. Behind the wheel sat Tommy, one of the troubled teenagers I trained on the cliffs. Following him, 3 more SUVs flew through the broken windows. What the hell? Diana spun around, aiming her pistol at the unexpected guests, but it was too late. Figures in tactical vests poured from the vehicles, my students, those same problem teenagers the town had written off as damaged goods. But now, with paintball guns loaded with pepper balls, they moved in unison, like a single organism. I took advantage of the momentary confusion and dived behind the nearest column. The first pepper ball hit Oscar right in the face, making him release Olivia. The second reached one of the bikers. The air filled with screams and acrid smoke, thick as fog over the bay on the gloomiest day of the year. "Kill them," shouted Victor, firing randomly. "Kill them all." But his people were already disorganized, like sailors on a sinking ship. The teenagers acted exactly according to the plan we had practiced over the last few days at the abandoned warehouse. Tommy and Brian provided cover while Samantha and Alex made their way to Olivia. Diana tried to reach the exit but slipped on shards of broken glass. The pistol flew aside. I intercepted her, twisting her arm behind her back. "Nothing personal, just business," I hissed in her ear her own words, feeling the bitter taste of irony on my tongue. Victor, seeing the situation spinning out of control, rushed to the emergency exit, an iron staircase leading upward. But he was already expected there. Jake and Lisa, twins whom I had literally pulled out of a street gang, aimed their guns at him. "Don't even think about it, mister," said Lisa, and steel sounded in her voice. "We're not those scared street kids anymore. We're a team." The bikers, blinded and choking from the pepper balls, dropped to their knees one by one, raising their hands. Oscar, wiping away tears, looked at me with a strange respect. "Damn good plan, Sergeant. Too bad we're on opposite sides." Outside, police sirens were heard. Someone from the local residents had called the cops after hearing gunshots. Victor, cornered, laughed hysterically. "You think you've won? This isn't the end, nephew. I have my people everywhere. In a week I'll be free and you—" He pulled out a small remote and pressed a button. "And you'll be burying your little heroes." Something rumbled in the depths of the lighthouse. I felt my blood freeze, recognizing the sound of an armed detonator. We had worked with such devices in Iraq, compact but powerful bombs capable of turning a building into a pile of rubble in seconds. "Everyone outside," I shouted, "quick." The teenagers, showing their training, headed for the exit in an organized manner, covering each other. Olivia and I were the last to leave the room, her hand trembling in mine like a captured bird. When we were already at the door, the first explosion shook the foundation of the building, as if the lighthouse had suddenly come alive and decided to shake off unwanted guests. "Jack," cried Olivia, "Victor." Turning around, I saw my uncle, taking advantage of the commotion, disappearing up the spiral staircase leading to the very top of the lighthouse. A second explosion brought down part of the ceiling, sending a hail of stone fragments downward. "Go with the kids." I handed Olivia over to my charges. "This is between him and me." And I rushed into the billowing smoke, jumping over debris, feeling the floor trembling beneath my feet like the deck of a ship during a storm. Somewhere above, my final meeting awaited with the man who had destroyed my family. This time, only one of us would come down. Chapter 4: The Last Tide. The wind was intensifying, bringing heavy leaden clouds from the sea. In the light of police car flashes surrounding the lighthouse perimeter, raindrops looked like silver threads sewing together sky and earth. I stood before a group of my students in an abandoned shed at the foot of the cliff. 12 pairs of eyes looked at me with the same determination I once saw in the eyes of my soldiers before important operations. "The plan is simple," I unfolded a map of the lighthouse on a rickety workbench, which I remembered from my time as a coastal rescuer. They're holding Olivia inside on the lower level. The main forces are concentrated here and here. My finger marked key points where guards usually stood. Victor's no fool. He expects us to try to break through the main entrance. Beside me stood Ray, my old comrade who had lost his leg in the same battle in Iraq where I got my wound. Now, surrounded by his combat brother's veterans, he looked 10 years younger, as if the years had retreated before the approach of action. So we'll split into 3 groups, I continued, feeling the familiar chill of an upcoming operation spreading through my veins. The first, under Ray's command, will create a diversion here. I pointed to the main entrance. The second group, Tommy and his guys, will come in from above through the observation deck. And the third, I surveyed my students, these troubled teenagers who had become my family, will go through the old smuggler's tunnel. It's damn narrow and cold there, but it's the only path they don't guard. Because only a suicidal person would go there in such weather. Jake, the most experienced of my students, grinned, looking at the raging sea. Exactly, I nodded. We'll need all the climbing equipment we can find. Safety systems, ropes, carabiners, and most importantly, radios. Communication must work flawlessly. Ray grunted, pulling out a handful of military-grade radios from his bag, borrowed from old friends. They work even underground. The next hour we spent checking equipment and assigning tasks. I watched as my students prepared for the operation, precise, collected movements, no fuss. Troubled teenagers whom society had turned away from like broken toys had transformed into a real team. My team. My pride in them mixed with fear. After all, I was leading them toward real danger, not a training exercise. The downpour had intensified when we began to move into position. Rain lashed at our faces, wind cut to the bone, bringing to mind the harshest training in the army, but no one complained. Ray with his group of veterans took position behind a pile of rocks at the main entrance. Tommy and his guys, using climbing equipment, began ascending to the upper platform of the lighthouse, clinging to projections in the stonework like spiders on invisible webs. I led my group through the narrow smuggler's tunnel, which began in the rock at the very edge of the water. Seawater had already flooded the lower part of the passage, turning stones into treacherously slippery traps. We moved slowly, securing each other, as I had taught them during training on the coastal cliffs. "Boss," Ray whispered over the radio, "we're in position. Counted at least 10 armed men at the main entrance. Oscar is personally checking posts. Something seems to be making them nervous." "Received," I responded, feeling bitterness spreading in my chest. Victor always had a sense for traps. He seemed to smell danger instinctively. "Tommy." "Almost at the top. The rain is excellent cover. They don't see us." I helped another student overcome a particularly difficult section where water already reached the waist. About 30 meters remained to the service exit. Somewhere above, Olivia was waiting for me, and with her, the man who had decided to turn our lives into ruins. The man whom I had once loved as a father until I realized that beneath the mask of nobility lurked a predator. The radio came to life again. "Giving the green light in 5 minutes." Ray's voice was extremely collected. "I hope you know what you're doing, Sergeant." "I hope so too," I muttered, checking the old army pistol I had kept for a case like this. "Everyone attention. We work according to plan. And remember, this is not a drill. They will shoot to kill." In the ensuing silence, only the howling of the wind and the splash of water against the tunnel walls could be heard. I closed my eyes, mentally returning to the day when I first brought these kids to the coastal cliffs. Then they were just teenagers seeking thrills and a way to prove to the world that they were worth something. Now they were something more. They were my salvation, my redemption for all those lives I couldn't save in Iraq. "Time," I said, turning on the radio. "Ray, begin." Outside, a deafening explosion sounded. The veterans had detonated a pre-laid charge, creating an impressive smoke screen. At the same moment, shouts came from above. Tommy's group had begun descent from the upper platform of the lighthouse, bombarding the guards with flashbang grenades that Ray had provided from his army supplies. The chaos created by the double attack was exactly what our group needed. We emerged from the tunnel just in time to see most of the guards rush to the main entrance. I gestured for my group to disperse. While the bikers were busy repelling the attack from outside, we quickly and silently penetrated the lighthouse through the service entrance. The first encounter occurred at the staircase. Two guards left for backup didn't expect an attack from behind. The guys acted precisely, as in training. The pain holds I had practiced with them for months worked perfectly. The guards were neutralized before they could raise an alarm. "Ray, report," I whispered into the radio as my group climbed higher. "It's hot here, boss, but we're keeping them busy." Judging by everything, Oscar personally led the counterattack. Tommy almost reached the upper tier. The guards are completely disorganized. They didn't expect anyone could climb up in such a storm. Suddenly the building shook from a new explosion, this time unplanned. Through the narrow windows of the lighthouse, I saw flames engulfing the warehouse behind the building. Either someone from the gang decided to destroy evidence, or... "It's Natalia," came a shout over the radio. "She's trying to escape in a jeep, and she's taken some kind of case with her." "Let her go," I replied. "Our target is Olivia." We reached the third floor when we heard the characteristic sound of working mechanisms. The machine room of the lighthouse, the heart of the entire building. From here, they once controlled the rotation of the lens that sent light far out to sea. I knew that sooner or later we would have to pass through it. This was the only way to the observation deck. "Boss," whispered Samantha, peering around the corner. "Oscar's there, and he's not alone." I carefully looked myself. In the dim light of emergency lamps, I saw the massive figure of the biker leader. Oscar stood at an ancient control panel, his hand on a lever. 4 of his men had taken positions behind metal gears, the mechanism that once rotated the giant lens of the lighthouse. "I know you're here, Harrison," Oscar's voice echoed through the room. "Come out, let's talk marine to marine." I signaled my people to stay in place. Something in Oscar's voice made me alert. There wasn't the usual aggression in it, rather the weariness of a man who had been playing a role not his own for too long. "Since when do bikers serve drug dealers?" I asked, not leaving my cover. "Marines, Sergeant. We're all former Marines here." In Oscar's voice sounded bitterness, deep as an ocean trench. "You know how it is, you come home and home is gone. No work, no prospects, just nightmares at night. Victor offered purpose money, a new war. And for this you betrayed everything you believed in, your oath, your brothers." "And what did I believe in?" Oscar hit the panel with his fist. "In a country that threw us away like used batteries as soon as we stopped being useful. In a system where people like Victor are in chocolate while people like us try to glue together the fragments of our lives." I slowly emerged from behind the corner, keeping my hands visible. Our gazes met across the dimly lit room. In Oscar's eyes, I saw the same weariness that had pursued me after returning from Iraq. But where I found healing in helping others, Oscar had chosen the path of self-destruction, like a ship heading straight for the reefs. "I understand you better than you think," I said quietly, "but there is another way." "It's too late for another way," Oscar shook his head, then turned to his men. "Leave us." "Boss," one of the bikers asked uncertainly. I said, "Leave us. This is between me and Sergeant Harrison." When the bikers had left, Oscar took off his jacket. In the flickering light, the scars on his body, battle marks from Iraq, seemed like a road map of a life full of suffering. "One-on-one, Harrison, like in the good old days in training. The winner goes forward." I nodded to my guys, indicating they should continue upward by another route, then stepped forward, taking a fighting stance I hadn't used since Army days. "Like in the good old days." The rumble of another explosion below rolled through the entire lighthouse. Tongues of flame shot up to the night sky, coloring the raging sea in ominous crimson tones. In the light of the fire, I saw police cars one after another pulling up to the foot of the cliff. But now that no longer mattered. I climbed the spiral staircase to the very top of the lighthouse, feeling how the icy wind tried to push me down. The fight with Oscar had not been easy. My ribs hurt with each breath, and blood oozed from a gash in my eyebrow, mixing with raindrops. But the main thing I had passed. At the last moment, Oscar himself had lowered his hands. "Finish this, Sergeant. Enough deaths." The door to the observation deck was ajar. Snow had managed to drift a small pile at the threshold, as if nature was erecting a final barrier between me and the decisive encounter. I carefully looked outside. Victor stood at the very edge of the platform, holding Olivia by the throat. The storm raged around, turning this moment into a scene from a Greek tragedy. "And here's our hero," he shouted through the howl of the hurricane. "Not another step, nephew, or your beautiful wife will start studying gravity from very close range." I slowly stepped onto the platform, feeling how rain and wind tried to knock me off my feet. Ice crunched underfoot. To the edge of the platform, where Victor stood with Olivia, was no more than 20 steps, but each could be the last for me and for her. "It's over, Victor," I said, trying to make my voice sound calm. "The police are below. Your people are surrendering. Diana betrayed you and fled with the money. Let Olivia go, and we can resolve everything like civilized people." "Civilized people," Victor laughed hysterically. "You were always so righteous, Jackie, just like your father. He also loved to discourse about morality, about honor. And what did it get him? He died in obscurity, leaving you this pathetic tavern." "He left me something more." I took another step forward. "He taught me what it means to be human, something you'll never understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly what it means to be human." Victor tightened his grip on Olivia's throat. She cried out softly. "It means taking what you want. It means being a predator, not prey. And you are all just fish in my pond." At that very moment, Olivia did what I had taught her many years ago. She sharply threw her head back, hitting Victor's nose with the back of her head. His grip loosened, and she lunged to the side. I rushed forward, but Victor managed to draw his pistol. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. I felt a bullet burn my shoulder as if with a hot iron. Victor staggered. The second bullet, fired by one of my students from an adjacent platform, had hit him in the leg. He stumbled, losing balance on the edge. I, overcoming the pain, lunged forward and managed to grab my uncle's hand a moment before he fell. "Hold on," I shouted, feeling my feet slipping on the ice. Victor looked up, and in his gaze I saw something I had never noticed before: fear. Real, primal fear of death. And then Victor smiled. That same smile he had smiled 16 years ago, leaving town with the stolen money. "Goodbye, nephew," he said, and unclenched his fingers. I helplessly watched as my uncle's body disappeared into the raging sea below. Somewhere at the edge of consciousness, I heard shouts. The police had noticed the fall. Olivia embraced me from behind, and I felt how she trembled, either from the cold or from the horror she had experienced. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." But I knew that wasn't quite true. Much remained to be resolved between us. Too much had been said and done in these days. Wounds inflicted by betrayal don't heal quickly. They're like fractures, requiring time and proper care. For now, I just stood on the lighthouse roof, embracing my wife, feeling how the storm subsided, how the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. Below, at the burning warehouse, police were finishing the arrest of the last bikers. Somewhere there among them was Oscar, a broken man who had finally made the right choice. "Dad," Rachel's ringing voice made me turn around. She stood in the doorway, surrounded by my students. "Everything's okay," her look said. "We made it." I nodded, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Yes, they had made it, all together. Epilogue. Spring came to Raven Creek unexpectedly early. The snow that had held on the cliffs all winter began to melt, revealing emerging grass, and in the air appeared that special scent of awakening that reminded of the eternal renewal of life. From the roof of the old harbor tavern, melted water dripped, drumming on the new entrance canopy like a small jazz orchestra. I stood at the window of my office, watching as Rachel conducted training with a group of beginners on a small artificial climbing wall we had built in the tavern yard. Her movements were confident, precise, a real instructor. On her chest gleamed a silver medal from the Regional Rock Climbing Championship. She had won it 3 weeks ago, and I still remembered how her voice trembled when she thanked me from the stage for everything I had taught her, especially for teaching her never to give up, even when the rock seems insurmountable. On the wall in a frame hung a newspaper article, Heroes of Raven Creek, how a group of troubled teenagers saved the town. Journalists had somewhat embellished the events of that night, turning ordinary kids into real superheroes, but they had captured the main point correctly. The town had changed. The rehabilitation through rock climbing program that I launched after those events received government funding. Now troubled teenagers were brought to me from all along the coast, to teach them not only to conquer rocks, but also their own fears. The bell of the front door jingled. Olivia entered with a basket of fresh seafood. She now bought everything only from local fishermen, supporting the neighbors' family businesses. Our eyes met, and I felt a familiar pain in my chest, as if an unextracted fragment was shifting between my ribs. After that night at the lighthouse, we still couldn't piece back together what was broken. Too much remained unsaid between us. The wound of betrayal was too deep. We continued to work together for our daughter's sake, but now lived separately. Olivia had rented a small house in the fishing quarter, a 5-minute walk from the tavern. "I've finished the new spring menu," she said, placing a folder with neatly printed sheets on the table. "There are several dishes that your veterans will like." I nodded, taking the folder. The tavern remained a meeting place for former military, only now they often came with their families. Ray had even organized weekly meetings for a psychological support group. They gathered in a separate hall after closing, shared stories, helped each other stay afloat in civilian life, which sometimes seemed more dangerous to them than war. Oscar was sentenced to 5 years, not so much, considering all the circumstances and his cooperation with the investigation. I visited him in prison once a month. We talked about the war, about coming home, about how difficult it is to find your place in civilian life that moves at its own rhythm, not noticing those who have fallen out of it. Oscar asked that after his release, I take him into the program to work with troubled teenagers. "Maybe I can save at least someone from my mistakes," he said then, and in his eyes I saw hope for the first time. Diana/Natalia was never found. There were rumors she had been seen in Mexico, then in the Caribbean, but that no longer concerned me. The money she stole was dirty, let that remain on her conscience. Sometimes, especially on rainy evenings, I caught myself thinking about her, about the electric tension that arose between us during our operations. But these were just echoes of the past, like the echo of a seashell in which one hears the sound of a long-gone tide. The town was gradually recovering from the shocks, like coastal cliffs after a storm. The new mayor, a young, energetic local guy, started a renewal program. Roads were repaired, a new youth center opened, a project to restore the historic lighthouse was launched. Now this place was to become a museum and tourist attraction, not a reminder of those bloody events. "Dad," Rachel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Come here, I want to show you something." I smiled and headed for the exit. At the door I paused for a second, glancing at my father's photograph hanging next to the bar counter. "You were right, Dad," I thought. "The main thing is to remain human, no matter what happens." The sun was already warming quite spring-like, reminding that even the longest winter eventually ends. On the climbing wall, Rachel was demonstrating to beginners some particularly complex element requiring not so much strength as balance and trust in one's own body. I recognized this technique. I had taught it to her myself once, long ago, in another life before Victor's appearance. Life continued, and there was much more good in it than bad. One just had to remember that. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A spring storm was approaching, cleansing and renewing. I took a deep breath of the moist air, smelling of sea and hope, and strode toward the climbing wall. Students were waiting for me, my beacons in the unpredictable ocean of life. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.